Greetings. The topic today is how the formal educational sector, both higher education and lower education, is on the brink of very substantial technological disruption, which has been overdue for some time. The seeds were sown some years ago, and now we're finally starting to see market effects. So I refer you back to an article that I wrote in late 2014 titled The Education Disruption 2015. And if you look at the date that this article was written, July 23rd, 2014, the article was predicting that 2015 was the turning point. That does not imply that we would see major market disruptions as far back as 2015, but explained why 2015 was in fact when the point of no return had manifested, because the seeds were sown for a technological disruption of this extremely low-tech sector known as education. And if you read the article and scroll down, you can see charts for the student loan crisis, which we can observe over here, and now see here a more updated student loan chart going further than the one that's in the article, showing a straight line increase. Now, this would be better if it were indexed towards the size of the economy, but nonetheless, you know that the size of the economy didn't rise 5x from 2003 to 2017, and this line has not moderated in the least. So the student loan crisis starts to come up politically quite a bit because educational institutions have preyed on gullible students and their parents to whom they have marketed the essentiality of a college degree irrespective of the price, and how the price can simply not be questioned. And in academia, if you get into a debate with someone who spent their whole life in academia, they will never admit that there is any price that is too high. They will say a well-designed curriculum is essential and you can't put a price on an education, and all kinds of empty, super generalized platitudes. But at what point does the amount of debt settled onto a person, and this is non-bankruptable debt in the United States, so they cannot discharge it through bankruptcy, at what point does that debt become excessive? If it uses up all their discretionary income up till the age of 30, 32, 35, even later, at what point is this too predatory and should the consumer merely step away? The government will never stop this from occurring because the university system in the United States and even the K through 12 lower education system is in fact a very essential arm of the ever-growing super state that exists. They will defend that to the death, because a lot of the intellectual output that the government uses to shape opinion in society originates from these universities. But what about the ordinary person who simply wants an education by which they will pursue a mid-level career or some degree of professional career? Obviously, they just want the education and want that to cost as little as possible. So what alternatives ultimately exist? And at what point does society recognize that most educational experiences, aside from the very topmost institutions, comprise merely the dissemination of information? So then we proceed to this table over here that really illustrates the scope of the overcharging that is occurring. As I said before, ultimately, outside of the top few degrees at the top few institutions, all classroom-based education is merely the dissemination of commoditized information. If you wanted to research something in the pre-internet days, you had to go to the library. So you had to actually go to the library, incurring time and expense in transportation, see if they had the book that you wanted or that had some information that you wanted, check out that book, and then go back home, more transportation. And that was only during the hours that the library was open, and more importantly, that was only in the few countries that had public libraries of any quality. The vast majority of the world's countries do not have public libraries of any quality. So that whole process took half a day sometimes, and if the book was not the one that had the answers you wanted, you had to go back to the library on another day and get different books. And if the entire library did not have the books giving you the answer that you wanted, there was pretty much nothing you could do. Now you can just research something on the internet. You can do it in a few minutes, and you can do it at any hour of the day. You do not have to leave your home. That is a productivity gain that is 10, 20, 50, or 100 times more efficient than the library experience of 1990, and that too only in countries that had good enough public libraries. So the same has to be true for education, and we have another industry that has been disrupted already that is a very good example of this. Before, you had to rent videos from a store. You had to go to a store like Blockbuster Video or Hollywood Video, and there were 9,000 such retail outlets consuming all that land and parking lot space to rent videos to someone. If the movie was one you did not like, all the time you spent going there, the fee of checking out the movie, and going back home, and then returning the movie and coming back. So 4 trips of transit, true round trips, and the cost of the movie rental was a waste. Now, under this streaming video model, the entire industry has been dematerialized. all those 9,000 retail outlets have shuttered. If you don't like a movie, you just switch to another one. There's little sunk cost. You can see reviews online to know that the movie is good even before you see it, even if you don't want to do that. And the price is extremely inexpensive. As you can see from the list over here, it varies between $6 and $12 a month, with 9 being average. In fact, you can even have 2 of these subscriptions if you want, and I wish there was some sort of Venn diagram service that showed which 2 subscriptions were the least overlapping. But you could have 2 of these if you want. The cost is so low that it doesn't even really matter. But compared to these streaming video services that now have thousands upon thousands of entertainment properties on them, and from all countries too, by the way. It's not just Hollywood content that is available through Netflix or YouTube Red or Showtime. You can get international films as well. The average university, by contrast, in the US costs $2,000 to $7,000 per month. Remember, the annual tuition fee that you see published is not for 12 months. It is for 8 months. Harvard University runs for 8 months of the year, not 12 months of the year. That is the fee. You can take summer classes, but that actually costs more. That is outside of the published $52,000 a year tuition fee for the normal academic year. So the average US university is $2,000 to $7,000 a month, as opposed to Netflix, Hulu, YouTube Red, etc., that are about $9 a month. This table illustrates the totality and the imminence of this disruption. A degree is a credential that you put on your resume to get a job, yes. However, the actual education delivered is something that can be delivered for a much, much, much lower price. All sorts of platitudes like you need the groups and you need the individual attention and you need to make the contacts. None of that is worth $2,000 to $7,000 a month. At the undergraduate level, many classes are taught by junior professors and graduate students, not even by the big name professors. The contacts that you make, yes, that has some value, but it's not like you won't make contacts in your other life outside. This whole premise of making contacts in college assumes that you are locked in solitary confinement if you don't go to college. You're not meeting any other people in your normal life if you do not go to college. And the cost is just astonishing. It has outstripped salaries by a huge margin. As recently as the 1980s, it was possible for many students to pay their way through college just by doing some menial job in the library or at a local restaurant and so forth. And now that it's completely out of the question. It uses up their wages for the next several years after graduation. If they go to graduate school and incur more debt, then their net worth doesn't become positive until well into their 30s. Maybe even later. This is extreme and the disruption is imminent. And the paradigm shift that also occurs is the elimination of the scarcity mentality. The notion that you have to already be an excellent person who applies to a university and then experiences the privilege of paying to be educated. We are accustomed to that because it's been that way for a very long time. But that is absurd. Society prospers when more people get educated. By creating exclusivity and an artificial scarcity model, you create less education in society and therefore less economic growth across society. Under a streaming model similar to these video streaming services, anyone could access any subject at any time. You don't have to be a certain age. You could start later in life. You could learn about a variety of subjects that make you a more holistically educated person rather than the degree requirements of a university where they tack on a lot of fluff just so the university can charge the student more. All these pernicious activities and perverse incentives get swept aside. And this is not to say that all university degrees will go away. The top tier will remain relatively unscathed because at that level it's less about education and more about status and prestige, and frankly half of it is for the parents more so than the student. They like to say that their son is going to Harvard or their daughter is going to Princeton or their other daughter is in year 6 of some super impractical major at some big name university. So the consumer good aspect will still exist. But in terms of basic education, someone wants to be just an engineer and get a mid-level engineering job, nothing too fancy or glamorous or top tier where they're doing research at MIT. There's no reason that should cost $2,000 to $7,000 a month, and the products to adapt around this are already emerging. This disruption exhibits all the characteristics of other disruptions I've described on this channel, including the disruption of oil prices and OPEC by United States hydraulic fracturing, as I described in this tile over here, or the disruption of taxi medallions via Uber, as I describe in this tile up here. When anything is getting more and more expensive, even as the quality of the product being delivered is constant or even declining, there is a huge amount of disruptive pressure being exerted by the technonomic medium of the world, the atom, to enable alternatives that are much, much cheaper and higher quality. If that can happen to OPEC, and that can happen to taxi medallions, and that can even happen to the concept of commuting to work versus having meetings over Zoom, then that can happen to education as well. And again, I urge you not to think in binary terms. It's not that there'll be no disruption or there is total disruption. Too many people are simple-minded and they think in binary terms. Think in terms of 50% of the higher education sector being swept aside. 70%, 80%. It'll never be 100%, nor should it. But 50% is huge. And that could happen in a relatively short time because the higher education sector of the world is about to reach its emperor has no clothes moment. And consider the secondary effects of this disruption. All that land, all those associated expenses of the university experience, all the international implications. If classes from a top-tier professor are online through an online streaming service such as Netflix or Hulu, then students in countries that could never have gone to that university, no matter how smart they were, have access to this information. So how is a tier 3 lecturer at a tier 3 university going to compete with that? They should not be able to. Technology enables economies of scale, and dematerialization is the precursor to disruption. So I'm going to have other videos about this subject on this channel because this is one of the primary technological disruptions that is underway in our era today, and the dollar implications are substantial, especially at the secondary and tertiary effect level of this, and the prospect of getting hundreds of millions, if not billions of people more educated than they could have been under the scarcity mentality, brick and mortar education model that rises in price while the product quality does not increase as the price is rising. So I hope you found this video enlightening and informative, and if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much for watching.